Good morning. It's News from the Roots on Mountain Stream TV. My name is Avram Friedman. Today is Tuesday, November 19th, 2019, and we have a guest with us this morning, Mary Jo Cobb, who is a friend and someone who has lived here in Silver, was born in Jackson County, and has a wonderful history that we're going to explore a little bit this morning. Just to explore the history of Jackson County and your family, and give a little historic perspective about where we live. So, Mary Jo, tell me a little bit about your childhood. Where were you born in Jackson County?
I was born in 1939 at Tuckasegee. In a home that I was a Depression baby, and I was born in a home there in Tuckasegee that my parents built. They used Blackwood Lumber Company was closing the timbering and all that work at East LaPorte. So Mom and Dad helped tear down and haul 3 of those workers' cabins to Tuckasegee, and Mother said she pulled every nail out of all those boards. And anyway, they built the house, and that's where I was born.
So what did your mother and father do?
Dad Dad was born in 1910, and he was a farmer. His father passed away when he was only 14, so Dad, being from a large family, had a lot of work to do there on the farm. He said to pay the taxes.
So, when you say he was a farmer, what, he grew and sold his crops?
Yes.
And what, are there any particular crops that
he tried growing tobacco, and he said that was a 13-month job. Could never ever get it all. Stay ahead of it, and sometimes when he would take it to market in Asheville, he said he made very little, really, but it was hard.
And what did he turn to after tobacco?
Well, after the corn and one time, 2 or 3 summers, they grew beans, and folks from all around in Tuckasegee came and picked beans, and Mother would work in the field picking beans, and then she would have lunch prepared for the workers. That was something that they always did. They fed the workers. And and I think this is neat, one time she had the workers brought their children, because there was that's all, they had no choice in it really if they worked. So at one time, one day she had 3 sets of twins sitting with their parents there in her kitchen, and she said if she had had a camera, she would have loved to have had that picture. But they paid them not very much, per bushel and so on. But
and where did they market the beans?
They took those to Asheville too. Dad would rent a truck and take it to Asheville and to the market there.
And I imagine the roads weren't very good back then.
No, that was an all-day trip, of course, and sometimes he did okay, and other times he said he flooded the market, which was, but anyway, then when things really got, I guess, harder, he went to the Great Lakes and worked on an ore ship, I guess it was. And they traveled from Buffalo to Chicago, all over, and he really enjoyed that.
Did your mom go with him?
No, she stayed at home and kept on with the crops, and there were 4 of us children.
Now, I've been told that the train used to go out to East LaPorte. There used to be a train because there was mining going on.
Well, and that's where the Blackwood Brothers, Blackwood Lumber Company is what it was.
Okay, so they were lumber companies came out there, and they were cutting down trees and
From
marketing
all
them.
over,
Yeah.
up Caney Fork.
But wasn't there also, was it a mica mine up that way?
I think maybe mica. There was, behind the mountain, behind our house, there was the copper mines.
Copper mine?
Yeah.
Okay.
And my grandmother had extra butter and food that she would, maybe a miner would come down to the house and take that back, and they would pay her for that. And we had a neighbor who had some cattle, and they would drive the cattle up to the copper mines and then they'd slaughter them. It was quite a big deal at the time.
Yeah.
A lot of workers and a lot of just a lot of men stayed up there. And now even in my creek that comes, actually most of the creek came out of the copper mine area, and it was contaminated back at the turn of the century with the copper.
I guess.
No, it was it was always on record as Tennessee Creek, the little creek that comes from the copper mines. But in recent years, they named it Mine Branch.
And this is up in Tuckasegee.
They're coming down just by my house.
So did the railroad come out to Tuckasegee?
No, it just came to East LaPorte.
East LaPorte, yeah.
Yeah, the track used to be across the road, and it always was bumpy when we.
Did that train take passengers, or it was just strictly for moving lumber?
I think just for lumber. I don't know of it as being a passenger.
So like your dad couldn't go to Asheville with his crops or anything using the train?
That was just for the lumber, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And but the train that came to Silva was a passenger train.
Yeah.
And one time, I think I was maybe 8th grade, they made arrangements and had a trip for the students. And this was a big thrill to get on a train. And I can remember it chugging up Balsam.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was a long, and we went all the way to Asheville on this train.
So every day that it made one trip?
It maybe made one or two. I don't know, but I'll never forget getting to do that. It was
when did that stop? I wonder.
I don't know. I don't know when it stopped, but I remember it coming into Silva, and that was a big deal for us students. You know,
when I first moved here, it was 1983. And there was a bus at that time that went between Atlanta and Asheville. I think it was a Trailways bus.
It probably was.
And then that stopped, and so there's actually no public transportation now between Silva and Asheville. But that's not that long ago.
And I can remember the bus station down there, and they had and as a child, we just accepted. We just didn't know, but they had fountains for blacks and whites.
No.
Now, see, that was my first.
In Silva, they had that. Yeah.
They're at the Trailways bus station.
Well, I heard that they had also a black and white movie theater. They had one movie theater for white people and one for black people on the other side of the street.
I don't know about that, but I remember the old Ritz Theater. That was a big treat for us kids to get to come.
That actually became the bus station at one point.
Did it? I don't know.
When we first moved here, that was the bus
well,
station.
this was long ago in my childhood.
Yeah.
But I had a good life there at Tuckasegee on the farm and so on. And my dad worked on the lakes, and then he came when the lakes would freeze in the fall of the year. Of course, then he would come home and bring the money that he had earned, and Mother and Dad would work on the house and do, that was the extra money that he had. So.
Did you have any siblings?
I had a sister, Katie, and a brother, Denton, and myself, and then a little brother, Ben. So there were the four of us.
Okay.
And my grandmother lived with us, and so did my great-grandmother.
Oh.
And
was it a big house?
Yes, a 4-bedroom home and big kitchen, big dining room. But Dad was he was not an experienced carpenter, but he figured things out, and so the house is like about 86 years old.
And he built it with his own hands, I imagine.
He and Mother, they were, and it's the wood inside it's beautiful, and it's all just the natural wood.
Is that house still standing?
Oh yes, I'm trying to take care of it.
Are you still living?
No, I live in the original old house, and I call it the 1810 chimney house. I use this, I have a wood insert in that old fireplace, so smoke comes out of it just like it did all those years ago. The chimney was built in 1810 when Indians, the Cherokees were all around, and I don't know how many greats it was, but grandfather was allowed to come in and build a little cabin because he shoed horses. He was a blacksmith, and so they allowed him to. He was accepted on the land, and so.
Your father or your grandfather?
Well, two or three great grandfathers
were blacksmiths. Interesting.
And but that was 1810 when the first little cabin was built. Then there was another and another, but everything was always added to the old 1810 chimney. So when I see smoke coming from it today, I'm real glad.
So that house, I imagine, has gone through several renovations.
Oh, it has,
And now I imagine it has plumbing and electricity. And,
it has.
Yeah.
It works now. Yeah. Very comfortable home, and I love it. But that's where I live, and where my husband and I retired and remodeled the old place again. Of course, with the chimney being the center of it all.
That's remarkable.
And, I love it, and it's probably one of the oldest chimneys in the country. But I find it interesting because I think about what has happened. Like 1810 chimney built. I think 39, maybe Trail of Tears, and World War I, and all of the things that have happened. Civil War, of course. But all of these things, and that old chimney stands there with its shoulders steady, and it's beautiful.
Is it rock or brick?
It's big rocks, great big rocks, and it's been a mystery to us how they were able to build this big chimney. And you think the pyramids, how did they do that? How did these local workers, local men, how were they able to build such a nice chimney? And I'm sure there's lots of others, but this one is still in use and
That's
still
amazing.
wonderful. I love it.
So are your siblings still alive?
My sister died 3 years ago, and my one brother is in California and another in Florida. But Mom and Dad always knew I would come back to the old home place. That was just the way it was going to be, and luckily my husband loved it too. So after we had moved to Akron for work, and when we were getting out of as we graduated from Colby High, you had to go away to find work. We didn't have money for college, and my sister graduated and went over to Brevard and worked at Acosta. That was her first job.
Worked where now?
At Acosta.
What's that?
That was, I'm not sure what kind of, I don't know what they manufactured. I should, Acosta. And it later became,
Like a paper?
then it, I don't know. She later then went to DuPont and retired from there. It was quite a drive from Brevard, but that was where she retired. But anyway, we went to Ohio. Dad moved it. We just closed the farm, sold the horses. That was a sad time when but that was the only that we needed to do that Mom and Dad felt for opportunities, for work opportunities.
So you sold the horses. So you had
Yeah.
horses that he plowed the fields
Yeah,
and,
yeah, it was-
and also for transportation, the same horses?
Well, they were just, we didn't ever get to ride them. They were just work horses.
They'd pull a wagon that...
A wagon. Grandpa built a wagon, and we had, we would haul corn, and then in the fall, apples. We had an orchard. It was a lovely farm, and that's why my heart is so much right there, because I remember.
Did your folks ever own a car?
No, we didn't have a car.
So how did you travel?
Well, Trailways bus came from Silva to Cashiers, and so when we needed to
Silver
go into
Cashiers, okay.
Highway 107, so that was our
Main artery of
Yes, it
transportation,
was.
yeah. And was it a paved road?
107 was the main road, well, the one that they're
From when you were born?
from when I was born,
And so you said you were born in 1939, and
Mhm.
that was the very end of the Depression and World War II.
In World War II.
Must have, well, it happened when you were a very young child. How did that, do you remember World War II?
Yes, I do. My dad had stopped working on the Great Lakes, and then he worked at Goodyear. He was a blimp builder. So when I used to see Goodyear blimps all around in Akron, I liked that. And I still, sometimes my daughter will call me, she said, I saw a blimp go over today, and she was thinking of her grandpa.
That was fairly, well, I say recently, because I remember Goodyear blimps, and I guess they're still around even, but
They are.
But I remember when they started. I was raised in New York City, but I remember Goodyear blimps flying over Shea Stadium and.
Let's see, that was a little bit of Akron, Ohio.
Oh,
coming your
isn't that
way,
interesting?
huh?
But that was the 1960s.
Yes.
That's when
yes.
your dad was working on building
He was
those.
building blimps.
Isn't that interesting?
But and he enjoyed that. He had a Goodyear uniform and a boatsman chair or seat that he used the boatsman seat because he was suspended down the side of the blimp to do the final the skin, I think, of the blimp.
Yeah.
And but anyway, I donated those, my mother and I, to the Goodyear Museum because that was something historic. And I was fortunate enough to get to pilot a blimp one time. This
My
one
gosh.
time, and I loved it. I felt so important.
Not many people can say that.
No.
That's very interesting. Yeah.
But we flew all over Akron, and so I got my little turn, and my husband had a turn driving it, the pilot. But it was a wonderful experience.
And all the time that your family was in Akron, you somehow maintained the homestead here?
We closed the house and rented. We actually rented the house where I live now because that gave a little bit of income.
Okay.
And the Butels had come to Jackson County, and that was one of the first homes they rented and lived in as they started their Christmas tree industry.
Oh,
And
how
so that's an
interesting. Okay.
interesting thing. They lived there at the old 1810 chimney, and they kind of kept an eye on things.
And that was during the 1950s and 60s?
That was in the late 50s,
Late
I
50s,
think, and
yeah.
early 60s. And then they eventually bought the John Brinkley farm.
Oh, yes.
Which has its own history.
Oh, yes. You want to talk a little bit about that?
My dad and mother were friends of the Brinkleys, and that was, it was, Dad always, he didn't like Dr. Brinkley being labeled as a quack or anything. He said Dr. Brinkley was ahead of his time. He really was very intelligent and Mrs. Brinkley would come up to the house and buy guinea eggs, because we had so many guineas.
So they were your neighbors,
They,
basically. the
not
Brinkley.
far away, yeah,
Not
they
too
were
far
there
away.
in the community.
Yeah.
And she would ride her horse up and get guinea eggs. And then when the Brinkleys would come from Texas to back to their farm, they would come to church, and we had it was a Brinkley Day at the farm, at the, from their farm up to the church, and it was a big celebration, like a homecoming. It wasn't anything official, but it was just that they, he had a huge big Cadillac and all of this, so it was a lot of excitement.
Just to inform our listeners, I'll give a little background. I mean, the Brinkleys, from what I know about it, is he developed a method of using goat gonads to resolve male sexual problems, and he developed a way of injecting something. I don't know what the problem, but he became well known for this, and people from all over the country and all over the world, as I understood it, would come to him to resolve their that physical ailment.
They said it worked.
That they had, and apparently it worked, and he became very wealthy from that, and then he went on to do other things. I think he ran for governor of Kansas at one time. He started a radio station on the Texas-Mexican border, and anyway, became very well known.
Because he was so well known, and he advertised a lot, and the AMA really was on his case.
Yeah, they didn't like him.
No, and so he just moved his broadcasting, built a radio tower across the border, and
which is actually in Mexico.
But we could hear the programs when I was little.
Here?
Yes.
Really, it was broadcast. I didn't realize it was that high powered.
Yeah, it was, and he was instrumental in bringing, like Aunt Samantha Baumgartner, who she played the banjo and violin. He brought local artists from, well, they were just entertainers who loved music and were well known in this area. He took them, had paid for them to go to his radio stations, so they became internationally known.
Interesting, yeah.
And the Carter family, he gave them a start.
Oh, really?
So he was mentioned in and I love this, in that Ken Burns documentary just this past couple of months ago. Ken Burns told about Dr. Brinkley and showed quite a bit about the hospital he had and so on. And when Ken Burns has the story, I always feel that he's telling it correctly, as accurately and everything.
We'll have to look that up. Do you know what which documentary that was? He's done so many.
Yes, it was just the history of country music.
Oh, okay.
And it was just on. It was on two.
It was on PBS.
2 hours.
Yes.
Wednesday through Saturday, I believe, and then Wednesday through Saturday again. But anyway, I watched every bit of it, and I remembered. Of course, everyone knows about the Carter family and all of this, but all of this was interesting to us. But I can remember about how important Dr. Brinkley was, and he campaigned. I think he actually won, I believe, the governorship of Kansas, but they changed the rules, and but he was a flamboyant snake oil.
They took away his victory somehow. They
did not have. He was not declared legal.
Interesting.
So that was an interesting thing I can remember in my childhood.
And what years are we talking now when he ran for governor?
That was. I think he died, I believe, in 1942. so a lot of things I've read about him and so on, just because he was such an interesting person to my parents.
So okay, so Brinkley died in 42. So
I
you
think
didn't
it
really
was.
get to know him.
I didn't know him,
Right.
but I remember the stories of him coming in. And in our church, Tuckasegee Church history book, we had some pictures of the crowd that came, and it was like a family reunion when Dr. Brinkley came back home.
That's just fascinating. Yeah.
And Lynn Hotalin has written a lot of articles about that chapter in
Yeah.
the life of Jackson County.
Yeah.
So it's good.
So okay, so you were a child growing up during World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And what are some of your memories about changes that took place? What happened in World War II?
I remember that my mother's parents had two sons and 4 son-in-laws. There was an article in the Silver Herald about them serving all in Europe and in the South Pacific. And I remember that my Uncle George Denton was at Pearl Harbor when the planes came over. And I know Grandmother didn't hear anything from him for more than 10 days.
Oh,
And
but
she
he
didn't
survived.
know. He survived.
Was he injured?
No, he was not injured, and he it was very. He shared a lot of historical things by experiencing it firsthand. He and his family. We're all just in awe of it. That he survived. That he actually experienced this in 1941, and then an uncle over in Italy, and another uncle who was at the Battle of the Bulge, and he had spent so much time in the water, he said, swimming back and forth, but he had frostbite and lost his toes.
Oh.
So all of this, we were very much aware and concerned. I can remember when they came home, the joyous reunion, So, but we were very fortunate we didn't lose any family members.
And so you were still living in Jackson County throughout your childhood.
I was 15
when you
when
moved
we
to
moved
Akron.
to Akron for job opportunities.
So that must have been that was in the 1950s.
54.
54.
1954.
Yeah.
I finished, and I still have wonderful friends from Cullowhee High School that I didn't graduate because I graduated in Ohio, but I go to our Cullowhee class of 57 reunions and all those.
So which elementary school did you attend?
Oh, Tuckasegee,
There was a school in Tuckasegee? Oh.
Straight across, where the Baptist church is.
Yes.
It's straight across the road.
From 107.
And
is that building still there?
no, what I remember most about that was in 1944. We went. The school burned. It was a big white frame building, and it was the last day before Christmas vacation, and they put papers and so on in the old potbelly stoves, kind of clearing and cleaning.
It's just a one-room building?
No, it had 4 rooms.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And but anyway, there was a funeral that day at the church, and so I went with my mother and my grandma to this man's funeral. He was a friend there in the community, Mr. Jim Hooper. And when we got up to the church, the first thing we looked across the road, and there, of course, it was flames forever. And it burned to the ground. Silva Fire Department didn't have any way to get there to save it. And
That was the closest fire department in Silva.
no volunteer fire departments.
What, do they know what
anywhere.
caused it?
Well, it was just they thought a spark from one of those pot-bellied stoves had maybe gone up and got in the attic. Of the, so it burned, and no one was lost. Everyone was out.
Was out. That's, thank God.
But something that is to me is so important is the Baptist church. As soon as Christmas break was over, the Baptist church had offered and rearranged and so on, and all of us children were able to come, and we finished the school year in the Baptist church. So I love that partnership. It's good. It's the way communities should be.
And so it was, and another building was never built at that point? Was that where consolidation started there?
That was a little bit later, but at the time they went ahead and built a brick schoolhouse.
Oh,
and
they
that's
did.
still standing. In fact, it's been apartments in more recent years. But the Tuckasegee School itself, I think, closed in 1957. I believe it was, when it was consolidated and brought the children, everybody to Cullowhee then.
To Cullowhee, to the, what was the name of that school? On campus, right?
Well, we
Cullowhee.
used to call it McKee Lab. They used to call the school because it was part of the college, I believe, at one time.
McKee is still there, the McKee building?
Training. We called it McKee Training, I think. But now there's Cullowhee Valley's elementary
Cullowhee
school
Valley is
and
what I was
so
thinking,
on.
yeah.
But it was, the school played a real important part in our lives. Very, had good teachers. We didn't have all of the advantages of, in fact, we didn't have inside bathrooms. I don't know how that failed to be in the new brick building.
Oh.
But
In the 50s, yeah. You would think that they would. So
but,
they had outhouses.
well, it was built in. The red brick building was built after the fire, and it was completed, I think, in maybe 1945.
I see.
But the plum, we'd always it didn't have a lunchroom. It didn't have so there were some funding problems.
Sure.
Somehow that
Just made do with what you
and
had.
it was supposed to have a complete heating system, but instead it had coal. I don't know how it worked, but we had students that was their work to shovel
feed the coal fire.
Yeah, and it wasn't supposed to be that way.
Yeah.
There was a hitch. But anyway, we had 4 classrooms, and we didn't have a library, but the bookmobile came.
Oh.
And we loved when the bookmobile showed up, and then we'd have a week to read our books, and then they'd come and take the ones we had and new ones then for us. So it was good.
And so you're saying like around 1955 or so, you consolidated or you were out of elementary school.
I was gone by that time, yeah.
But I imagine they had buses at that point
Yeah, we
that
had
brought,
buses.
yeah.
Number 36 went up toward Glenville, up toward the powerhouse and on up that way, and number 28 was the bus that went up Canada way.
Isn't that interesting? So there was, in essence, a public transportation system at that, but it was run by trailways.
No, this was school, just regular
Oh,
school
school buses, I see.
From Cullowhee, they went up Speedwell and so on, and back in Little Canada, it was just a gravel road, and the bus would pick, children would come out, and their dads would bring them to the bus stop with a lantern at 4 in the morning to get that bus for the long ride down to Tuckasegee School. And then of course, the older ones went on to school. But it was hard times. mountain folks with lots of courage and strength, hard times.
They had a lot
But
to endure just
education
for day-to-day
was
life. Yeah.
so important, so important.
Sure.
And of course the college was it was the Western Carolina Teachers College then.
Mm-hmm.
So I had cousins who went there and became teachers.
And you went, and which high school did you
I
attend?
went to Cullowhee through the 9th grade, and then in 1954, that's when we went to Akron.
Right. So the college campus was on the campus of Western Carolina University?
McKee Lab, training school.
That was the high school.
It was all right there.
In one complex, sort of, yeah.
And I think the elementary schools were more in each community. You know, you have Tuckasegee, and you had a Glenville school, and then up Cullowhee Mountain, there were schools up there. We've seen pictures, you know, of what the schools used to look like.
And there was a town of the town of Glenville was bigger, right? I mean, when Lake Glenville came into existence, that was in the 1940s, correct?
Right.
When they flooded the town of Glenville.
It was a community just like, and maybe I would think more prosperous and more things going in the Glenville community than maybe down in more rural Tuckasegee, probably, because they had a hotel in Glenville, and there were summer people and so on, even at
I've heard that during times of drought, sometimes, and the lake is low, you can still see the top of the church steeples
there
sticking out of the water.
Things, and then lots of buildings were moved and so on. But that was in the early 40s, and my mother. Let's see, there was the 1940 flood, which was a huge thing. I can't remember that, but I remember the stories. The whole Tuckasegee Valley was flooded. From my house, the entire valley.
Your house was underwater?
No, way up to the road, from
wow.
the road below my house.
Yeah.
And it took crops, gardens, everything. It was but that was August of August of 40.
Yeah, I think the town of Dillsboro was completely
submerged. The same devastation.
Yeah.
And that water came from back in, they said it was like a cloudburst. I think they described it, where it just, the heavens opened up and it just, my dad said that they could hear boulders, like way up in Shook Cove and up where Bear Lake is now, but boulders would, the landslides, the earth would move so, and boulders would roll down the mountainside, and he said even across the river and up on the other side, the force of the water was so great.
And I've heard, I mean, some people say that partially, at least, due to the logging that had taken place, there was nothing to stop the deluge coming down the mountain and the mudslides, and that really exacerbated things.
I think that played a big part in it, because when Blackwood was, the mountains were clear cut, pretty much, as I have heard, as I understand. And I think that made a big difference in the just the plain erosion of the mountains and so on. But it was a terrible time, and of course all the crops were lost. And my mother said that the county agent came through later after a few days after the flood, and telling everybody, be sure you don't eat any vegetables from your garden. But Mother said, how would you have eaten vegetables when the watermelons were waterlogged? And she said the peppers full of flood water. So
they were contaminated with what? I mean, why would they be?
Muddy flood water.
Just,
See, and it took it a few days, of course, to go down, so your vegetables were, they were ruined. But Mother didn't think that they needed to be reminded of, don't eat that, because you said it was all wasted, it was gone. But,
you ended up at that point.
no,
Right.
no. But, and the corn crops, anything in those lower bottoms along the river, it was ruined. And,
So what led to the decision of your parents to move to Akron?
it was because as we, like personally for our family, as we graduated from high school, you had to go away to find work. Like my sister went to Augusta in Brevard. She was a secretary.
There was just nothing
there.
here anymore.
There were
The mines had closed.
Mines weren't. All of that was, as far as I know, much earlier, like a turn of the century.
I see.
So,
And logging had been
and logging
completed
was,
pretty much. Yeah.
And yeah, it was just that was the decision. Of course, a lot of other families moved also, but that was just a personal family decision. Do you stay or do you just pull up and go?
Right.
And there were a lot of families in Akron that we knew from, and their relatives and so on.
So Akron was a place where others from this area?
There was work.
Yeah.
Where there was work.
Interesting. Yeah.
And
Akron, I mean, you'd think.
and Detroit was another place. A lot of people went to Michigan for work.
And I understand that a number of people went to Skagit Valley in Washington State,
it was
because that's where the logging
huge,
industry,
right.
people who, that's what they knew how to do.
They were, exactly. They knew they had a skill, and they could go there in the lumbering, and many families that never came, they didn't come back.
Yeah.
But even kids that I went to Cobb to high school with went to Washington. Concrete, Washington was a town I don't know about it, but I know that was the address of some of my friends who left like we did and went to find where there was work. People had to have work.
And so you were in Akron from the mid-1950s
Till I retired in 2000.
Till
So, see, I was up there a long time, but my heart was at Tuckasegee. I just always.
So you
wanted to
didn't come back here to live until 2000?
We came back on vacation every year, but I married and raised my family. We had a daughter and son, and so I had a good life there. I retired from Akron Public Schools.
You were a teacher?
I was a school secretary.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I had a lot of this. My child, I wanted to help my child, you know, and my husband retired from Goodyear after 44 and a half years.
So your husband as well as your father worked for Goodyear?
Goodyear, back when we first went to Akron and I graduated from East High, I had a job before I even finished high school, so I started to work at Goodyear immediately as a secretary, and I loved that. But then I took a time off when we had our children. I didn't work till they were middle school. Then I started.
Are your children still living up there?
Our daughter is. She's married and lives near Akron and works in Akron, the Akron Metropolitan Housing. That's what she works. And then our son is is over in Townsend, Tennessee, so he's nearby with his family. So this is good kids, good schools, good opportunities, and are good people, I think. My husband died 4 years ago, and but he enjoyed, and we did a lot of things here that and he did Meals on Wheels and church work, and so he just fell into the life of the community, and it's been good. it's been really good.
If you will, talk a little bit about the changes that have taken hold in Jackson County, from the difference between what it was like then and what it's like now, or in 2000 when you moved back. What?
I, like with my husband doing Meals on Wheels and so on, he enjoyed that so much because he got to hear the old stories from folks who had lived here all their lives. And he really enjoyed that. And the mark, it seems like to me, is how when the old frame Tuckasegee Elementary School burned, how the church, the partnership, there was no, is it legal, is it this, or is it that? They offered and worked together to make sure, because education was the most important thing. And that community spirit, I loved that. And I still feel that it's here. Everything has changed. More folks have come in and so on. But you still have a good spirit in the watching out for each other and so on. And I love that. Mm-hmm. And it's of course the ones that I had known all those years ago, most are gone. My mother's friends and so on. But I've been blessed with being adopted by my mother's dad's old friends, so I have always felt just a big part of the community. Mm-hmm. All that it, but even with all the changes and even this road construction, I really wish it was still just a little narrow road and people would just slow down and we wouldn't have to have all the changes. And that road construction means lots of things are big changes clear through the community, really.
One of the things that I've heard and I've seen impact the community is with all the development. You know, this has become a vacation destination for many people, and there are wealthy people from other parts of the country who've come here, built second homes, and these big developments that have taken over entire landscapes, and it's really driven the property values sky high, and that has really impacted the people who have lived here for generations, because very often, probably your family and others own vast tracts of land, hundreds of acres in some cases, sometimes thousands of acres. But because of this development, and property values have gone so high, taxes have gone through the roof as well, property taxes, and so that's made it impossible for the local people to keep their lands, because they just would not be able to pay the taxes on it, even though nothing has essentially changed on that property, you know.
Right.
And on paper they're millionaires because they own all of this land, but they don't have the means to pay the taxes to keep it up, and so they're forced to subdivide their lands and sell off pieces and things like that. How has that impacted the culture and
I think it's made a huge difference, because new maybe second homers coming in and so on, and the mountains being homes built on the mountains and all of this, it's changing the landscape, of course, a lot. But it has taxes are maybe they're not that high and so on, but for the average person, it is quite a burden. Mm-hmm. It's a burden. But and these land prices have made it. We have hung on to ours just because it's home to us and very sentimental. Everything about it seems like, but I can see where the temptation is there to, hey, you can make some good money, and
avoid tax
and
paying
avoid
so
the
much
taxes.
right.
Yeah.
So how much land does your family still maintain?
There's about 100 acres.
That's a lot of land.
And a waterfall on it and all.
Oh.
It's so pretty, and it would be worth quite a lot, I'm sure. But
yeah.
I'm hoping that my children will come back and do as I have done, retire, and of course there's no guarantee, who knows what, but that is my hope.
I guess there's a possibility of creating a conservation easement to avoid taxes and things like that.
Yeah.
But that, of course, assumes that you'll never want to sell the land and profit off of it.
But Western has been, I have enjoyed I consider it, of course, it's a very small partnership, but I've had classes come out and study my creek, our creek, to see if it's still contaminated from the copper mine, all of that well over 100 years ago.
Is it?
And no, it's by all this
Stabilized.
time it has stabilized.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so glad, because for the longest you couldn't have fish. They died, and it looks like a wonderful trout stream, but it wasn't, because the copper.
So have they come back? Are they trying in there now?
In the spring-fed, we have 3 fish ponds, and in the spring-fed ponds, they do great. But there's one pond that has a certain content of copper still, a little bit of contamination. So I bought 100 catfish not long ago and put in one of the ponds just to see what would happen.
How did they do?
But, well, they're still there. They've avoided the water snakes. But,
Okay.
and my mom and dad stocked 2 of the ponds with trout, and they were great. And everyone came and fished and enjoyed, and fish fries and so on. Because Dad always was always doing something with water. The water was his interest, and that little creek, he just enjoyed ducks and just the water. He always was careful about the water, and of course they didn't know way back when the copper contamination. I mean, there were no rules or regulations, I'm sure, on that. But anyway, the creek's doing lots better.
That's great. So, like, over the years, somehow you have developed an environmental consciousness and become involved in the environmental movement to some degree.
A part of water and so on, and I watch for erosion. You know, if there's buildings and because we have a lot of frontage on the Tuckasegee River, and if you see what could be a problem, like water wants to know, and we want that. Well, we've been reading just recently about some of the erosion problems with building on what we call Long Branch, but they're in Cullowhee and so on.
Yes.
So it's the environment. So it's so important. And when you mention about second homes and all of this, if we don't have rules and regulations, there'll be homes on top of the mountains. When was it, 10 years ago, when the regulations were put in place, and that was quite a controversial thing, but the mountains...
That's the steep slope ordinance, I think.
Steep slope, yeah, that's what it was. But all of this is so important to protect these mountains. That's what brings the tourists and money to these areas, and if you don't protect the environment, then what do you have? What would make it such a wonderful place to visit? I have a lot of company, and they'll come, friends from Ohio and so on, and they're always saying, if this is the most beautiful place we've ever seen. They love the mountains and the ruggedness of the whole area.
And of course, Mary Jo has been a long-time contributor to the Canary Coalition in the past. Every year, you always give something, and we appreciate that.
I'm glad to help.
But that, in some ways, it runs against the grain to a certain degree for some of the local population there's this streak of independence, which I completely understand, that runs through the mountains, that is anti-regulation, anti-government telling us what to do, etc. And I understand and respect that sentiment. But at the same time, I think that consciousness is growing among the old-time local population, that hey, if we don't preserve this area, we're not going to have anything left. But let's talk about, I mean, when I first moved here, you couldn't say the word zoning, for instance, without getting a shotgun pointed at you.
It was bad. It was.
But that is beginning to change. I think people, all people who are beginning to understand that as the population has increased and there's more impact on the environment, that's a bigger threat to the way of life here than some amount of government regulation and intervention.
It just seems like it's common sense to protect and have. I know when you mentioned zoning, that's one of the first, those several years back, when about the ordinances and so on. Someone came to me and said, nobody's going to tell me where I can build my woodshed.
Right.
Well, that was pretty much the thinking. Mm-hmm. That was but I think you're right. We have seen there's more acceptance of regulations, or just, to me, it's just common sense of everyone trying to work together to protect. If we don't protect it.
So let me, was there a certain point in your life when you remember yourself changing, or have you always had a certain amount of environmental consciousness?
Well, my dad was careful on the environment.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he had a real respect for the land, and anything that he did, any road he built to get wood,
mm-hmm.
He always made sure, I can remember that he would make sure that was where there wouldn't be runoff and so on. He was careful about that.
But how did he feel about government regulations and intervention?
He would have, of course, he was an old timer,
mm-hmm.
And he would have, I think that he would have understood and gone, I think he would have gone along with, that he wouldn't have wanted a house built on top of a mountain, or not that sort of thing, but he loved the land, yeah. and I think that he would have, gone along with what's being done to try to protect.
So you feel like you've picked up some of his way of living?
I respect, and I think that he did too. And one big thing with him was having survived the Depression. He said, unless you experience that, you could not know. And he blamed, of course, a lot of politics on bringing that mismanagement, so bringing about the Depression. He had some real tough feelings about that, and how the common working man was placed in a god-awful position. Couldn't help. Like he worked when they were building the Cullowhee Road along close to Dick's Gap. That was the original road, but he was paid 10 cents an hour and he walked from Tuckasegee down to, well, of course, it's the old Cullowhee Road now that goes around and then over to the college, but that was the Dix Gap area. But he made 10 cents an hour, and he walked from Tuckasegee there and walked back and walked again the next day. But he said hard times changes a person. When you know that the common working man is taken advantage of.
Yeah, there was terrible exploitation throughout this region. I mean, mining companies, lumber companies, etc. They would come in and they'd extract what they wanted to extract, and they'd pay people as little as possible, and then leave, and leave a depression behind, essentially, just a vacuum of ways to earn a living.
But like my mother was, of course, when my older sister was real small. Shirley Temple was the big thing, a Shirley Temple doll or a Shirley Temple dress or anything. This was what young mothers wanted their little daughters to have. And Mother said when she went to Silva, she saw a little Shirley Temple dress in one of the store windows, and she said, it was 25 cents. But she said, I didn't have 25 cents. So Grandma sewed a little Shirley Temple dress for my sister. But see, you just can't imagine. Dad always said, if you haven't experienced this, you don't, your mind can't conceive what it was like. But everybody survived just because they grew enough crops and so on to feed their families and so on, but not an extra penny. And that's why I think we laughed, because Dad he loved to build, but he also saved everything. And mother said this junk, but he couldn't help it. He saved everything, and now I'm wrestling where do I put this or that. But it's
I still have that problem. I like to save everything myself.
I like junk.
That's true.
But you never know.
I'll unbend a nail and put it into.
Okay, well you're just the same mindset then. But it's okay. You know, it's okay. But Dad always, he felt that there must be a use for everything, so don't throw it away, you know. And so we grew up with that.
That
with
mentality. Yeah.
And I think Dad was reasonable and so on, but I think he would have gone along and understood on a lot of things that, well, we say big government or whatever, but I think he would have gone along with things that he felt were for the betterment of the people and so on. But he also had that independent streak too, so I don't know.
We're complex beings, aren't we?
Yes, we are. So you don't know. Oh, and when you mentioned about the Glenville Dam, I have a neighbor who was one of the people who was forced out because of the building of the dam, and she has written a real interesting book. But in 1940, when the big flood came, I think the Glenville Dam was just getting under construction, and but my mother kept boarders. That was a way to make a little extra money. The workers that had come in from really all over the country to work on this construction of the dam, and she would some of we had a big the house Mom and Dad built was big, so she had upstairs bedrooms that the shift that worked at night, she would when they would come in in the morning, she would give them breakfast, and then the kids had to be kind of quiet because they had to get their sleep, and then Mother sent them their a lunch for them when they left in the evening to go to work.
Oh.
And then so she was constantly feeding or fixing a lunch for these workers.
What, did they have a truck that brought them back
Yeah,
and
they
forth? Or?
one fella had a car, and
I
they kind
see.
of carpooled however they could. But it was interesting that when the 1940 flood came, one of the fellas from I think he was from Baltimore, but there was a power line that Duke, or well, not Duke, but the power company had run up 107 all the way to get electric up to where the powerhouse is, and so on, where the construction was going on. And the one fella who was went out to go to work the night shift, got stuck in the rising water and so on there at the flood. And anyway, one of that power line, the flood waters had dislodged the pole, and when it hit the water, when the line hit the water, there was a flash.
Oh.
And this Baltimore worker said to my grandmother, he said, that must be the Coast Guard coming. You know, he was, Grandma said, Coast Guard nothing. She said, you're in the mountains. But it destroyed his car. They couldn't get it out of the flood waters, and of course he couldn't get to work for several days. But that was just, but it was quite an array of people, of men who came from all over, and Grandma always said that was interesting to see how naive they were about the mountains, you know. But up at Glenville, families moved. My neighbor, who wrote the book about her experiences, said they loaded everything they had in the back of a pickup truck. Mattresses. She said it looked like the Beverly Hillbillies coming down the mountain, but they lived there in Tuckasegee and eventually became our neighbors. But this was typical of so many families, and they moved the cemetery, removed the caskets and put them across from the Hamburg Baptist Church
Hamburg,
cemetery.
that's up Little Canada Road, that way.
No, it's up Glenville.
At Glenville, okay.
And but there's a big cemetery there. Of course, it's grown and grown, but that's where they moved a lot of the.
They actually had to exhume bodies from cemeteries in Glenville at the churches and whatnot. Yeah.
Because everything, I mean, it was totally, everything was totally gone, and there was a lodge there, and so there, I think celebrities had come, you know, and it was quite a vibrant place, but again, it was the common farmer that everything had to go. Just so I think of that when I crossed the Glenville Dam, because that was from the pictures and so on, a beautiful place. But
The town of Glenville. Yeah.
So
I've never seen photographs of the town itself, where it was, but it's just mind-boggling to me to think that they would do something like that.
And it can
And they
be
did the
done.
same in Fontana, the same thing. There were
Yeah,
actually
all of
3
this.
towns that were submerged under Fontana.
Like you hear about Bone Valley down around Fontana, all of these places that were homes and communities and so on. And Tuckasegee, really, several families moved from the Fontana area to Tuckasegee because the water was going to, their homes were taken, the property was sold. And but that was kind of an interesting thing because they got acquainted with you know, if they didn't know each other, they got acquainted. But Tuckasegee was kind of a common common area, I guess. Some other families sold and so on.
Was Tuckasegee more of a town than it is today? I mean, today there's very little in Tuckasegee. You drive through and you see some old buildings with kudzu growing on top of them.
Kudzu grows everywhere.
but were there stores and was it more of a commercial center at one time?
Not particularly. It's still my mother was a Georgia girl, and she came up to Ruth Parker's store there at the forks of the river to work for them in the store, and she cleaned house and so on. But that was
Where was the store located?
Just up the Canada Road, but the old Canada Road used to turn at the end of the bridge, what is now the end of the bridge.
With
and
post
it followed,
offices, kind of.
on past where the post office, out where the bridge is.
Yeah.
You turned up and it was just a gravel road.
And there was a store up there.
A store, and my mother worked there, and they gave her $1 a week for working. And if she did the laundry, besides working in the store, if she did the wash, they gave her 50 cents more. And she sent that $1 every week to her family in Georgia. There was a big family, and that was my mother. She's always helped, always shared and doing. And then there was the Doc Moses store on the right-hand side as you're going toward the new bridge. And
It was just a general store.
A general store, and then Doc Jr. Moses had a gas station, a filling station there, and so no, there really wasn't
That was
much.
it,
And the
huh?
little post office was just a little tiny building in beside Doc Moses' store, as I remember all those years back. So, and we walked to school, and all the
But
nearby kids walked.
But Glenville had like a main street and a
I don't know, but it seemed like it was. I've always have felt like there was more of a little town.
Yeah.
Where Tuckasegee was just Tuckasegee.
Right, what it is today, yeah.
It hasn't changed a whole lot, but now with the road and all of this, and of course Tuckasegee Church had a new church built and so on, and the little church on the hill, the Wesleyan Methodist Church. I think the valley still has the same feel to it. I love it. I have friends that I feel if I needed someone, they'd be checking on you. They'd see about you. So I appreciate and I love that. But it's as Jack Henson, our Tuckasegee Baptist pastor, says, it's great to be at Tuckasegee. So that's his. But yeah, the old folks that I knew and remember are gone. But the younger ones, it's a good place. It really is a good place to be. But
one more thing I want to ask you about. There's a controversy about how to spell Tuckasegee. I've seen it spelled three different ways. What's the right way to spell Tuckasegee?
Well, it started out, I think, Tuckaseegee.
Okay.
And then the higher ups, I think in the early 40s, changed it to Tuckaseegee. And so everybody had to, okay, and nobody liked having to, trying to remember a new way of spelling. That might have been Big Brother looking over your shoulder,
No.
I don't know. But now then it's Tuckaseegee. and that's the, so I don't know how long that will last.
Right.
And the Indian culture and so on, what they've been able to find and so on. Forks of the River was really a busy place. I mean, like in the 60s they did a dig there at the Forks of the River and found. Well, I have a book that shows the like it would have been the roof like of the maybe the what would they have called it, the council house, I think. But they were able to find a lot of things, and then after the dig and so on, a lot of the things they found were taken to Raleigh for preservation, but and then they just covered it back. But that could have been like the Judicola Rock sometimes. I think, if it could have been preserved and so on. But
So how many generations back does your family go in Tuckasegee?
I'm the sixth there at the Chimney House.
Sixth generation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And does it have any roots in the Cherokee heritage, or is it purely Scotch-Irish?
It's just Scotch-Irish, I think, and yesterday when I went to the dentist, the little technician was a Cherokee young woman, and I thought I'd better be nice because she might think about the Trail of Tears or something. And but Absalom Hooper, I think, is kind of where I think he kind of started all this Hooper history, that he's buried down at East Laporte. But and I don't know a lot of that history, but I do know just from the story. I know more on just the stories my parents and grandparents shared along the way. And I ran into a person not too long ago, and I remembered his parents, and we just talked a little bit, and I remembered about his aunts and family and so on, and about his great grandparents, and he said I didn't know where my great grandparents were buried, and I did just because they were friends of my great. I knew that. I find that real interesting. I'm kind of one of the last ones to read.
So where is the family cemetery? Your family cemetery?
My family cemetery is just across the creek and up the hill from my house. And I think the earliest grave there that is marked was Jack Shelton. And there was a little stone with his name and the date of his death, October the 19th, 1865. And my grandmother, and I know this, I remember it so well, she said, "Joe, that's the first school teacher in this country." Now, why he was buried up there, see, I didn't know to ask Grandma a lot of things. But that's the earliest one that, the earliest grave, but my great-great-grandfather and Grandma was up there, and my husband's buried there, my parents are, and I already have my marker up there, of course. But I love the cemetery, and at one time it had real big red cedar trees, big cedar trees. And while we were in Ohio, someone took the liberty to cut those big cedar trees and left the branches all over the graves. And it was a mess, and my dad was very upset.
I can imagine.
But in the Indian lore, as we understand, those the red cedars were planted at graves, and that was a way to mark where an Indian graveyard was, because you could see the red cedars winter or summer, and it was a way of locating Indian cemeteries. So we don't know who else is buried up there. It might be a long ago Indian cemetery, but I mentioned I partner with, or I call it partner with Western, but they've had for several years they've had this searching. I'm trying to think. But it's the dogs that that can. Let me see how I can. From Western has in-services for training these cadaver dogs. That's what I'm trying to think of. And people come from all over the country to train their dogs. And Western has asked if they could bring this group up to my cemetery, because it's away from traffic, away from everything. And they work the dogs. And the college has determined there could be as many as 200 more graves on that cemetery hill, because they have the computer equipment and so on, where they can determine if there's a grave, if there's an earth disturbance. That's how they can tell, like. Well, I don't know I don't know how the machine works exactly,
Right.
but they just roll it along, and
they can tell the density of the earth.
Yeah, yes, and they can tell if there's has ever been a ground disturbance. So that has been real interesting to me. But the cadaver dogs are marvelous. I've watched some of the training, and the dogs they go and they just stretch out across across a grave.
And just point to it.
And couples have come from Alaska and from Washington State that have actually done help in landslides and where homes have been destroyed and so on. But I find it real interesting. It's a good group, and it's different some have repeated, but most of the time it's a new group. But I appreciate Western's. I'm happy to help with that. I just so on it goes.
So you mentioned that you remember stories that your parents told you of the past. Do any particular stories stand out that you could relate to us? We're kind of running out of time here, but maybe if you could give us one story in particular that stands out to you.
I love this story because it was my great-grandmother, Queen, who lived far back in Little Canada. And during the Civil War, soldiers came through. They were on their march to Atlanta, and soldiers came through, and my grandmother.
He's a northern soldier?
Yeah, on the march to Atlanta, and they stopped by. They came on their horses, and they stopped at their little mountain cabin. And of course, my grandmother was just a little child, and she said, "I hid behind my mother's dress. I was so afraid." And said the soldiers shot chickens, and told my mother to, cook them for a meal. They were hungry, of course, and they took their horses to the crib, the corn crib, and took fed the horses real good. And then
they didn't ask; they just did.
They just did it.
Yeah.
And she said, her mother kept saying, "Don't be afraid," And but she said she knew everybody was so upset. But anyway, the soldiers did no harm, and she had prepared the food, and then they took some extra corn with them, and and rode away.
Mhm.
But when my grandmother, by living, she was bedfast and lived at our house for um, 10 years. But um, when I feel so blessed to have her, to have heard from her mouth this story, and I know it's true. So I feel blessed. I really feel blessed. But that stands out in as one of the oldest stories that I can remember.
Well, Mary Jo, thank you so much for coming and sharing your memories with us. And this is such valuable information. It's important for people to understand the history of where they live and how things have changed. Not always for the better.
No.
But it's important to know where we came from, and your memory is a treasure.
Thank you. I love this country, so I love my home place and so on. And the longer I live, the more important I feel it is to try to share any honest, real memories and so on, and the stories that I have been told and can accurately remember. I want to share because I think as we get older, our history is more important to us all the time. But I've been blessed, no question about it.
Thank you.
Oh, this was fun. Good. Thank you.